Hey guys, I wanted to make this video here before our lab is expired. So it's expiring in 3 hours and it's getting kind of late. So while we weren't quite able to hit all the marks with this test, I think we got pretty far and I wanted to share it with you before we got locked out. So essentially what we have is the ability to provision new servers within Apstra through client workflows. And it actually turned out quite well. So here is our blueprint, which we can click into. And actually, I have a server because I was running this and testing right before I started recording. So I'm going to go in and delete my server very quickly. So here we go, delete the node. Excellent. So we did this based on the tutorial, essentially, that is this Postman collection. Now, the Postman collection is quite extensive. There is something like 23 individual endpoints that are run inside it. There is a lot of system variable it's relying on. A lot of the variables in here don't quite match with what's in the lab, so that threw us for a loop a couple of times, and I think there is still a few details around Apstra, especially connectivity templates that we need to understand. But that aside, this is actually quite extensive. It looks deceptively simple on the screen with the 23 endpoints, but behind these endpoints, there is actually about 2,200 lines of code, right? That's actually powering them. So if you look here, as you run each one of these templates, and this is basically the Postman collection, the code of the Postman collection, as you run each one of these things, there is a ton of processing taking place. So it took us a little bit of time, like I said, but we've been able to wrap it into a client workflow. So if we take a look at it, it's right over here. This is the client workflow that essentially does the same work that we just saw with the Postman collection. And let me just go ahead and run it. So we're going to step right through it, and essentially it works pretty quick. If we switch back to our lab, which is right here, the server is already being provisioned again. So it takes barely any time to get through it. And let's take a look at the workflow very quickly, just very high level, go through some of the highlights. Essentially, as we start the workflow, again, we have a whole bunch of variables that we go off: the name of the switch, server, device profile names, etc. And as we jump into this, we have to get our security zones. We need to then, for the particular blueprint that we have to get the virtual networks, we have to get the switch ID, interface maps, walk through them to find exactly the one we need, do the same thing with device profiles, do the same thing with logical devices. And then as we walk through these things, finally we get to the point where we create the server. And there is a lot of complexity in this endpoint. I shouldn't say complexity, really, it's just a lot of data. We have to pass in quite a few variables, right? The server name, we're passing in the interface map results. There is, for the links themselves, we have to pass in the information as well, the blueprint ID. So there is a lot of things that are happening. But again, it's obviously quite a bit simpler doing it inside client than if we look at something like this here, which is where it's happening in the inside the code, which is quite messy. Yeah, this is it. So this is where the variables get mapped for the creating of the server. So all of this code is essentially encapsulated and wrapped inside this little table, with things being nicely visually laid out, the variables, easy to trace, easy to position, and obviously with hints and documentation instead of sort of having to go through and hunt within arrays and escape characters and all sorts of things. So after that, we wait for the task to finish. We get the node ID. We then go through the templates, trying to find the one that's applicable to this particular VLAN. And ultimately, once we are happy with everything, we go through and look at for any validation errors, look for status, look for blueprint changes, and and commit the blueprint changes, I should say. And finally, we look at any anomalies that have happened post deployment, and that's it. So again, thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to record this video before the lab expired, so we have a record of what we built. And yeah, this has been fun.